Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I thought I would carry on a little bit about the conversation that we had in the video yesterday, talking about the Federal Reserve and what the new monetary policy is going to look like going into the future. And we're going to find out a little bit more here at the end of the week about what may have been, what may be discussed or being discussed at the Federal Reserve as far as what their take on the future monetary policy is going to look like. And, there is a lot of debate out there about whether or not we're going to have inflation or deflation or disinflation or, inflation on just assets, but, it can get really confusing out there as far as what the future is going to take, what's going to happen, and a lot of people are already talking, like, you could, just look down in the comment section anytime you ever mention the word inflation, and people are talking about inflation already being here, and yet by the way the officials look at inflation, we're running under 2%, and this is where the big debate is going to start to take place, because up until this point, the Federal Reserve has always shot for 2% as their target. Like, let's go for 2%, and once we achieve 2%, we have achieved our goal of where we want inflation to be. And that's going to change because they still want that 2% inflation, but because they can never seem to keep that 2% inflation for any kind of substantial length of time, it's no longer like if they can achieve 2%, but more of if they can get to 2% on an average basis. Because now what they are talking about is running inflation hot. This is what a lot of the conversations out there are talking about. And to overshoot inflation for a period of time to bring up the average inflation to 2%. Now, this is kind of the idea of what the Federal Reserve is going to do to deal with the fact that inflation has been running so underperformance, if that makes sense. But yet out here in the real world, when we spend our money, we spend it on food and fuel. Like, that's where the average person goes. I mean, unless you make a lot of money and you have, a lot of other things that you can do, the average person with just an average job, living an average life, spends most of their money on food and fuel. I mean, that's where it goes. I mean, it's their single biggest expense, I'm sure of it. And the inflation rate that has taken place in that, I'm sure, is higher than 2%. And really, when the Federal Reserve is creating this money, they're creating it so that it flows in a particular direction. And that's why you see, like, asset prices inflating dramatically. The stock market, the housing market, bonds, all the stuff that the Federal Reserve is pushing money towards, those are the things you're seeing the biggest inflation in pricing going to. So when they talk about inflation, the way they produced inflation in the past was to drop interest rates to get people to go out there and start consuming, taking out money to go out there and, buy cars and houses and go on vacation. And now they're realizing this is not going to work because we cannot drop interest rates. So stimulating the economy by encouraging people to go out there and acquire more assets by taking out loans to purchase them. And this is the consumption that the Federal Reserve pushes when they drop interest rates down. Knowing that that's not going to work, they have to take a different avenue towards it. And that's one of the reasons why they are so upset with, like, the government not passing a fiscal stimulus package. Because really that's where, like, the Federal Reserve would be like, whew, we don't have to really do anything because the Treasury is doing it for us. By passing, by the government, passing these stimulus packages, whether they go into government spending programs or, stimulus checks or whatever, as long as the money is taken out and pushed into the economy, it doesn't matter really where it flows, so long as it flows. I mean, that's the whole point. It'll find its way, like, fill the sluices, so to speak, and it'll just find its way. It's one of the reasons why you have like so many like fraudulent government spending programs, is because they really don't care where it goes as long as it just moves. And knowing that the Federal Reserve is not able to stimulate the economy, they are dependent on the government spending programs, and that's one of the reasons why you're now starting to hear so much about the digital currency and the central bank digital currency for stimulating the economy, because they are wanting to inject money directly into the pockets of the people. I mean, this is like their ultimate way of being able to create inflation. If they can inject money directly into the people's pockets, as opposed to going through the banking system where you lend money to everybody else and then it eventually gets into the consumer's pocket to go out there and buy stuff. If they could just give us cash and we go out there and spend it, the inflation would start to pick up. The money velocity would definitely start to pick up. Because all this lending that has taken place, it's been lent to the consumer, not to the producer. Like, if it was money being lent to the producer who produced goods, who were able to hire people and sell those, goods off to people who are working, that's where like you have the benefit of lending into like a lending economy, right? But when you lend just to the consumer can consume real quick. Oh yeah, I got all this stuff. Go out there and purchase, which is good for the producer, because you got all these people purchasing. But as soon as the credit is turned off or is no longer sustainable for the consumer, then it all ends. And the consumer now has to produce either a service or something, come up with the money to pay for all this stuff that they have purchased. Now going into the future, they have to do without consuming in order to pay for the consumption that they've already done, plus the interest rate that goes with it. So lending into a consumer economy eventually is just going to collapse upon itself. If you can lend into production, then you got a different story taking place. But we don't have that happening. What else did I want to kind of mention on this? Well, I'm probably getting in over the 10-minute mark, and I got to go back into work anyway. But anyway, that'll give us something to talk about. A little carry on from the conversation we had yesterday. I think that it would probably be, a pretty good discussion, considering that, there's definitely a monetary policy change coming from the Federal Reserve, taking place here in the future. They're going to, some of the talk is like low interest rates for 2 to 5 years into the future. And I can only assume what that's going to do to the rest of these asset prices, especially stuff like homes. I can't imagine like homes crashing on a low interest rate economy. Like, if interest rates started to rise, then I could see the housing market turning. But if interest rates stay very low, then I don't know. I mean, who knows what the Federal Reserve has planned for the next, 5 years. And, they always seem to change the rules, add new ideas, new concepts to the system. Just when you think that, you kind of got them figured out, they come up with a whole new realm of possibilities. So anyway, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.